she caught her billionaire husband with his mistress at his own shareholders' gala. The divorce papers she served him didn't just end their marriage, they destroyed his untouchable empire. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. Catherine Lewis woke at 4:30 in the morning the way she always did. No alarm needed. 12 years of marriage had trained her body to rise before dawn, to have Frank's preferred blend of Ethiopian coffee brewing before his first call with the London office at 5:15. She stood in the bathroom of their Tribeca penthouse, studying her reflection in the mirror as she applied her makeup with practiced precision. She looked good. 39 years old, and she still turned heads. Her dark skin glowed against the white marble of the bathroom, her natural hair styled in elegant waves that had taken her stylist 3 hours yesterday to perfect. Frank liked her to look polished. Effortless, he called it, though they both knew the effort was anything but effortless. Catherine moved silently back into the bedroom, pausing at the foot of their California king bed to watch Frank sleep. He looked peaceful, his jaw relaxed, his breathing steady. Even at 44, he was undeniably handsome, sharp features, salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished in boardrooms, the kind of face that graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. She remembered the first time she'd seen that face, 20 years ago at Columbia Law, when he was just another ambitious student with big dreams and she was the brilliant scholarship kid everyone said would make partner before 30. She had made a partner. Then she'd given it up for him. Catherine reached out, her fingers hovering over Frank's shoulder, then pulled back without touching him. After all these years, she still felt, what? Lucky wasn't quite the right word anymore. Proud, maybe. Proud that this man had chosen her. Proud that they had survived the lean startup years, the skeptical investors, the 70-hour weeks that nearly broke them both. Proud that they had built this life together, 3 homes, influential friends, a tech empire worth $3 billion. But proud of what, exactly? She pushed the thought away. Catherine slipped on her silk robe and padded through the penthouse to the kitchen. The space was silent except for the soft hum of their Sub-Zero refrigerator. She started the espresso machine and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city begin to wake below her. December 18th, Frank's biggest investor meeting was today. The one that would push Lewis Technologies' valuation past $5 billion. She had already coordinated everything. Frank's assistant knew to have his car ready at 6:45. The household manager had pressed his Tom Ford suit, the navy one that photographed well. Catherine had reviewed his talking points last night, sharpening his arguments, anticipating investor questions the way she used to prep for trials. The coffee finished, and she poured 2 cups into the handmade ceramic mugs they'd bought in Tokyo last year. She pulled out her phone and sent Frank's assistant a text, remember he takes calls with Tokyo at 5:15, London at 6 o'clock. Make sure conference room A is set up with a new presentation deck. Then she typed a second message, one she'd sent to Frank, you're going to kill it today. I believe in you. Always. K. She had been sending messages like this for 12 years. Little reminders that someone was in his corner, supporting him, believing in him even when venture capitalists didn't. Up early, as always. Catherine turned to find Frank standing in the doorway, wearing only his pajama bottoms, his chest bare. He still worked out 5 days a week with his personal trainer. The stress of running a billion-dollar company required outlets, he always said. He looked good. Better than good. Morning, she said, walking over and kissing him lightly, tasting sleep on his lips. Coffee's ready. I sent your assistant the final checklist. He pulled her close, his hand settling on her waist. The diamonds in her wedding band caught the early morning light. What would I do without you? Probably miss half your meetings and forget to eat lunch, she said, smiling against his mouth. Probably. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Catherine felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest. After all these years, he could still make her feel wanted. Valued. Essential to his success. They drank coffee together at the Marble Island, discussing the day ahead. Frank had the investor meeting at 9, a lunch with the board at 1, and the planning session for next week's shareholders' gala at 4. If everything went well, and it would because Catherine had made sure of it, Lewis Technologies would announce their expansion into AI infrastructure. More money. More influence. More proof that their sacrifices had been worth it. Nervous? Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. Frank didn't get nervous. That was one of the things she'd first loved about him, his absolute certainty, his unshakable confidence. Not even a little. I've got this deal locked down. He reached across and took her hand. Couldn't have gotten here without you, Kat. All those years you handled everything so I could focus on building this company. All the times you believed in me when investors didn't. Catherine squeezed his hand. That's what partners do. Still, I'm a lucky man. He glanced at his Patek Philippe, the one she'd bought him when they closed their Series B funding. I need to shower and get moving. Traffic's going to be hell even with the driver. Catherine watched him walk away, noticing something she hadn't before. He was walking differently, lighter, almost buoyant, like a man with a secret that made him happy. She dismissed the thought. He was excited about the investor meeting. That was all. Upstairs, she heard the shower turn on. Then, strangely, it turned off. Then on again. Catherine paused, a coffee cup halfway to her lips. Frank never interrupted his showers. His morning routine was as rigid as hers. She shook her head. She was being paranoid. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind from their last phone call, that man works too much. All those late nights, all those business dinners. You sure you know where he really is? But Catherine did know. She trusted Frank completely. They had built this empire together. They were a team. She had given up her own career to be his partner. They were solid. Weren't they? By 6:30, the penthouse was alive with controlled chaos. Their housekeeper, Maria, had arrived to prepare breakfast. Frank's assistant had sent 3 urgent texts about scheduling conflicts. Catherine fielded them all while simultaneously reviewing the guest list for next week's shareholders' gala. 400 of the most influential people in tech, all gathered to celebrate Lewis Technologies' success. Frank came downstairs in his suit, smelling like expensive cologne. Catherine noticed it immediately. "Is that new?" she asked. "What?" "Your cologne. I don't recognize it." Frank barely paused as he grabbed his phone and briefcase. "Same one I always wear." "Must be your imagination." But it wasn't. Catherine knew his cologne. She had bought him the same bottle, Creed Aventus, for the last 4 years. This was different. Spicier. More woody. "Smells nice," she said carefully, watching his face. "Thanks, babe." He kissed her forehead, already distracted by something on his phone. "I need to run." "Big day." "Wait, I made notes on your presentation deck." "Just a few tweaks too." But he was already at the door. "I'm sure it's fine. Don't worry about it." The door closed behind him, and Catherine stood in the foyer holding her tablet with the presentation note she'd spent 2 hours perfecting last night. He never left without reviewing her notes. She always gave them. He always took them. Until today. Maria appeared beside her with a plate of perfectly cut fruit. "Mrs. Lewis, would you like breakfast?" Catherine looked down at the tablet screen, at all her careful work now irrelevant, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Just the smallest whisper of doubt. "No, thank you, Maria. I've lost my appetite." She walked back to the windows overlooking the city, watching the morning sun reflect off glass towers, and wondered, not for the first time, but perhaps for the first time truly, when her husband had stopped needing her. Or if he ever really had. Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Monica Chen, her former law school classmate and one of the few people from her old life she still kept in contact with. "We need to talk. Today. It's urgent." Catherine stared at the message, her heart beginning to pound for reasons she couldn't quite name yet. She typed back, "When and where?" The response came immediately, Sarabeth's. 10 a.m. "Come alone. Please, Cat. This can't wait." Catherine looked at herself in the mirror by the elevator. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Perfect outfit. The perfect billionaire's wife. She had no idea that in exactly 4 hours she would discover that her entire perfect life had been a carefully constructed lie. And the man she'd sacrificed everything for had been planning her destruction all along. The perfect performance. Catherine stood in her home office, a converted bedroom with views of the Hudson River, and reviewed the household schedule on her iPad. Tuesday meant Maria cleaned the penthouse, the dry cleaning needed to be picked up by noon, and Frank's mother was coming for lunch at 1. She added a note to have the cook prepare Eleanor's favorite, poached salmon with asparagus, light on the butter. Eleanor Lewis was particular about everything, especially what went into her body. She called Frank's executive assistant first. "Rachel, it's Catherine. Did Frank mention the Bloomberg interview tomorrow?" "He did, but I don't think he's prepared talking points yet. I'll send them to you within the hour. Make sure he reviews them before bed tonight." And Rachel, that article in TechCrunch this morning, the one questioning his expansion strategy. "Had the PR draft a response but don't publish without my review." Of course, Mrs. Lewis. Catherine had been doing this for 12 years, managing the invisible infrastructure of Frank's empire. She drafted his speeches, vetted his public statements, even chose which charities he supported to optimize tax benefits and public perception. Frank was brilliant with technology and business strategy, but public relations, image management, the soft skills that made billion-dollar deals happen. That was Catherine's domain. The domain she'd built from her years as a litigator, reading rooms, reading people, knowing exactly what to say and when. She spent the next hour crafting talking points for Frank's Bloomberg interview. The journalist would ask about AI ethics, they always did now. Catherine wrote out 3 responses, each calibrated for different directions the conversation might take. She emailed them to Rachel with the subject line, "Have him memorize option 2." At 12:45, Eleanor Lewis arrived wearing Chanel and disapproval in equal measure. Catherine greeted her at the door with a smile that hurt her face. "Eleanor, you look lovely." "Catherine." Eleanor's eye swept the foyer, looking for imperfections she'd never find. Catherine made sure of that. "Is Frank here?" "He's at the office. Big investor meeting this morning." "Of course he is. That boy works too hard." Eleanor handed her coat to Maria without looking at her. "I hope you're taking care of him properly." They sat for lunch in the dining room, afternoon light streaming through windows that cost more than most people's houses. The salmon was perfect. The wine was a Sancerre Eleanor had mentioned liking once 3 years ago. Catherine remembered everything. The gala next week, Eleanor said, cutting her fish with surgical precision. I assume you've seated me appropriately. Not near the Bradfords, you know how Catherine and I are. You're at the head table, next to the governor's wife. Good. Eleanor took a sip of wine. You know, Catherine, you really have done remarkably well for yourself. Marrying into this family. Not everyone could have adapted so seamlessly. There it was. The compliment wrapped in poison. The reminder that Catherine was an outsider who'd been granted entry, not someone who belonged. I'm very fortunate, Catherine said smoothly, her smile never wavering. Frank is an incredible partner. Yes, Frank has always been generous. Eleanor dabbed her mouth with her napkin. I just hope you remember how lucky you are. Some women might take a life like this for granted. Start thinking they're entitled to things they're not. Catherine's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her fork. I never forget what matters, Eleanor. Family, loyalty, dedication. That's what I was raised to value. Of course you were, dear. Eleanor's tone suggested otherwise. I'm simply saying that being Mrs. Frank Lewis comes with certain expectations. Standards to maintain. We're not just any family. We're the Lewis family. The unspoken words hung in the air, and you're not really one of us. Catherine smiled wider. I understand completely. And I never stop working to honor what Frank has built. What we've built together. After Eleanor left, Catherine stood at the window, watching the city blur through unshed tears she refused to let fall. She had done everything right. 12 years of perfection. And still, she was the outsider. Still, she was the one who needed to prove herself worthy. Her phone buzzed. A reminder, meet Monica at Cereberth's in 20 minutes. Catherine grabbed her coat, checking her reflection one final time. Not a hair out of place. Not a crack in the armor. She had no idea the armor was about to shatter completely. The photograph. Catherine sat frozen in the leather booth, staring at Monica's phone screen as her friend swiped through image after image. Each photo was a small detonation, but Catherine's face remained perfectly still. 12 years of depositions had taught her never to react where anyone could see. That's from last Tuesday, Monica whispered, sliding to the next photo. Frank and the blonde woman outside Maria, his hand possessive on her lower back. I'm so sorry, Cat. I debated for days whether to tell you. Catherine forced herself to breathe slowly, counting inhales like she used to before cross-examinations. The woman was younger, late 20s, polished in that effortless way that actually required tremendous effort. Designer dress, perfect highlights, the kind of confident smile that came from never having sacrificed anything. In one photo, Frank was feeding her something from his fork, intimate and practiced. In another, they were pressed against a car outside the Mandarin Oriental, his mouth on hers like she was oxygen. Tuesday. Frank had texted at 7, investor dinner running late. Don't wait up. He'd come home at midnight smelling like hotel soap, had kissed her forehead, and climbed into bed beside her. She'd asked how the meeting went. Productive, he'd said. Very productive. Who is she? Catherine's voice came out steady, clinical. She was already shifting into case mode, compartmentalizing emotion, cataloging evidence. I don't know. I tried to find out, but Monica's hand shook around her coffee cup. Cat, there are more photos. From other nights. I started following him after the first time because I needed to be sure before I destroyed your life with this information. More photos. Catherine swiped mechanically. Different restaurants, different dates, same woman. Frank's hand in her hair. Their bodies angled toward each other like magnets. The final image showed them entering a building on the Upper East Side, Frank's keycard opening the door. Catherine checked the timestamp, November 28, 9:47 p.m. Thanksgiving week. Frank had told her he was meeting with the CFO about Q for projections. She set the phone down with careful precision, as if it might explode. Her wedding ring caught the cafe's dim light, 3 carats, set in platinum, the engagement ring Frank had presented at the top of the Empire State Building while a photographer he'd hired captured every moment for their future children to see. They didn't have children. Catherine had postponed pregnancy 3 times because Frank said the company needed stability first. Soon, he always promised. When things settle down. Can you send these to me? Catherine heard herself ask. Of course. Kat, what are you going to do? Catherine looked at her old study partner, at the pity etched across Monica's features, and felt something inside her crystallize into cold, hard purpose. She'd spent 12 years being Frank Lewis's perfect wife, his invisible infrastructure, his tireless champion. She'd given up her partnership, her autonomy, her identity. And he'd been planning to discard her like outdated technology. I'm going to find out everything, Catherine said quietly, standing and pulling on her coat with steady hands. And then I'm going to destroy him. She walked out of the cafe with her spine straight and her head high, every inch the composed lawyer she used to be. She made it to her car before her hand started shaking. But even then, even as her perfect life shattered around her, Catherine's mind was already working, cataloguing evidence, building strategy, preparing for war. Frank had betrayed a litigator. He was about to learn that was a fatal mistake. The paper trail. Catherine drove to a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from anyone who might recognize Mrs. Frank Lewis, and opened her laptop with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford now. She had work to do. The joint bank accounts came first. Frank had always handled their finances, he was the tech genius, after all, but Catherine had kept her access credentials. Old habit from her litigation days, never sign anything you haven't read, never lose access to information that could destroy you. The primary checking account looked normal. Household expenses, staff payroll, utilities. But the savings account made her breath catch. Last month's balance, $847,000. This month, $293,000. Catherine pulled up transaction histories, her prosecutor instincts firing. Wire transfers, each one precisely timed. $50,000 to an LLC called Clearview Holdings. Another $75,000 2 weeks later. $100,000 the week before that. She'd never heard of Clearview Holdings. She cross-referenced the dates with Frank's calendar, the one she'd helped manage for 12 years. Every transfer corresponded with a business dinner or late meeting. The night of Maria restaurant? A $30,000 transfer to Clearview Holdings the following morning. Her hands moved faster now, pulling up investment accounts. Frank had liquidated $2.3 million in stock options 3 months ago, claiming tax optimization. The money should have been in their diversified portfolio. It wasn't. She traced it through 3 intermediary accounts before losing the trail completely. Offshore. Had to be. Catherine called David Park, a forensic accountant from her old firm, using a burner phone she'd just purchased. David, it's Catherine Lewis. I need your help with something extremely sensitive. 3 hours later, she had confirmation. Frank had systematically moved over $4 million into structures she couldn't touch. Shell companies, offshore accounts, trusts in his name only. All in the past 6 months. But the money wasn't the worst part. Catherine accessed Frank's email next, her fingers trembling as she typed his password, the same one they'd always shared. She found the folder buried in his archives, labeled innocuously, Legal Consult. The first email was dated June 15, 6 months ago. Lawrence, I need to discuss divorce strategy. My wife and I have grown apart, but I need to protect my assets. She didn't contribute financially to the company's success. I built Lewis Technologies before we married. I need to ensure community property claims are minimized. Catherine felt ice water flood her veins. They didn't have a prenup. And she'd quit her partnership to support him through the startup years. She'd been there for every all-nighter, every pitch meeting, every crisis. She kept reading. August 3rd, Lawrence, regarding the narrative, Catherine came from nothing, scholarship student, no family money. It's important to establish that our lifestyle is entirely due to my success, not any contribution she made. Judges respond to facts. Her vision blurred. She forced herself to continue. August 29th, we need to be strategic about the race issue. A black woman divorcing a wealthy white man can create sympathy I don't want. We should establish that she pursued me, that there was an element of social climbing. My mother can testify that Catherine was always very focused on our family's status and connections. Catherine read that paragraph 3 times, each word carving itself into her memory like a scar. September 12th, if she contests the settlement, we paint her as unstable. She quit her career suddenly, has been financially dependent for years. We can suggest she's not mentally equipped to manage significant assets. Her emotional volatility during the marriage. She closed the laptop before she shattered it against the wall. Frank hadn't just been cheating. He'd been planning her destruction, building a case to paint her as a gold-digging, unstable social climber while systematically stealing money she'd helped him earn. Catherine sat in that Brooklyn coffee shop as the afternoon light faded and felt the last piece of her heart that still loved Frank Lewis turn to stone. He wanted a war. She'd give him one he'd never forget. The confrontation that wasn't. Catherine's hand was on the penthouse door when she stopped herself. Every molecule in her body screamed to storm inside, to throw Monica's photos in Frank's face, to demand answers for the emails that had rewritten their entire marriage as a calculated lie. But then her legal training kicked in, that cold, analytical part of her brain that had won cases other lawyers said were unwinnable. Never confront an opponent until you have all the evidence. Never show your hand until you're ready to play it. Frank had spent 6 months preparing for this divorce. She'd had 6 hours. Catherine took 3 deep breaths, arranged her face into the expression of a devoted wife, and walked inside. Frank was at the kitchen island with his laptop, still in his suit from the investor meeting. He looked up and smiled, that same smile that used to make her heart skip. Now it just made her want to vomit. "Hey, babe. How was your day?" Catherine set down her purse with steady hands. "Fine. Lunch with Eleanor was delightful as always." "How was the meeting?" "Incredible. We're locked in at a $5.2 billion valuation." He stood and pulled her into a hug. She let him, noting again that woody cologne that wasn't his, cataloging it as evidence. "I couldn't have done it without you. Those talking points you prepped were perfect." She pulled back, studying his face. He looked genuinely happy, genuinely affectionate. 12 years of marriage, and she'd never known he could lie this well. "I'm proud of you," she said, "because that's what the perfect wife would say." Let's go out tomorrow night. Celebrate properly. Just the two of us. His hand settled on her waist. I feel like we haven't had quality time in weeks. Because you've been with her, Catherine thought. But she smiled and said, I'd love that. That night, Frank made love to her with what seemed like genuine passion. Catherine responded appropriately, said the right things, made the right sounds. And the entire time, her phone was hidden in her nightstand drawer, set to record. She'd started documenting everything, every conversation, every interaction, every lie. The next morning, Catherine woke at 4:30 and went through her routine like always. Coffee. Breakfast prep. The perfect performance. When Frank came downstairs, she kissed him like she meant it. Late meeting tonight, he said casually, buttering his toast. That Singapore deal needs attention. Catherine checked his calendar after he left. No Singapore meetings scheduled. She checked the Clearview Holdings account activity through the backdoor access David had helped her establish. A $25,000 transfer was pending, dated for tonight. She called Monica from the burner phone. I need contact information for the best private investigator in New York. Someone discreet. Someone thorough. Kat, what did you find? Everything. And now I need more. Over the next week, Catherine became a ghost in her own life. She played a devoted wife flawlessly while systematically dismantling Frank's secrets. She installed monitoring software on his laptop while he showered, using techniques David's IT contact had taught her. She photographed documents Frank left in his study. She recorded conversations. She tracked his location through the Find My iPhone feature he'd forgotten she had access to. Thursday night, Frank's behavior shifted into something almost comical in its transparency. His phone rang during dinner, a number she didn't recognize, and he practically ran to his study to answer it. Sorry, babe, he called out. West Coast investor. Can't miss this. Catherine stood outside the closed door, her phone recording every word. I miss you too. Frank's voice was soft, intimate, nothing like how he spoke to investors. Tomorrow night, I promise. I know it's been hard. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Catherine's too busy planning the gala to notice. Catherine's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. But she kept recording. Friday morning, the house phone rang while Frank was in the shower. Catherine answered from the kitchen. Lewis residence. Silence. Then breathing. Then a woman's voice, young and uncertain, is Frank there? He's unavailable. May I take a message? A sharp intake of breath. No. No message. The line went dead. Catherine stood holding the phone, staring at the caller ID. A 917 number she didn't recognize. She photographed the screen, added it to her evidence file, and calmly continued preparing Frank's breakfast. When he came downstairs, she smiled and handed him his coffee. Someone called for you on the house phone. Didn't leave a name. Frank's face flickered, just for a second, before smoothing into casual interest. Probably a wrong number. You know how it is. Probably, Catherine agreed, watching him over the rim of her coffee cup. That afternoon, while Frank was at the office, Catherine sat in his study and methodically copied 12 years of financial records, emails, and documents. Every piece of evidence she'd need to eviscerate him in court. By the end of the week, she had enough to destroy him 3 times over. But she wasn't ready yet. She needed one more thing. She needed to catch him in the act. The untouchable man. Catherine sat in a private conference room at her old law firm, surrounded by documents that painted a picture of a man she'd never truly known. David Park, the forensic accountant, had been working 18-hour days for a week. Now he pushed a thick folder across the mahogany table, his expression grim. "Catherine, this goes deeper than infidelity and hidden assets. Your husband has been playing very dangerous games." She opened the folder. The first document showed a web of shell corporations, each one connected to Lewis Technologies through nearly untraceable threads. Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Singapore. Money flowing in complex patterns designed to confuse regulators and avoid taxes. Aggressive tax avoidance, David explained, pointing to highlighted sections. Not quite illegal, but skating close enough that the IRS would have questions. Very expensive questions. He's sheltered about $40 million in income over the past 5 years. Catherine's hands moved through the papers, her litigation instincts cataloging everything. Stock options exercised the day before major announcements. Trades made through accounts not in his name but clearly under his control. Purchase orders that coincided suspiciously with market movements. Is this insider trading? I'd need a subpoena power to prove it definitively. But yes, I believe so. And there's more. David pulled out another file. The offshore accounts aren't just for tax purposes. Frank's been paying people. Look at this pattern of withdrawals. Monthly payments, each between $20,000 and $50,000, going to individuals Catherine didn't recognize. She cross-referenced the names against her mental database of Frank's business associates. Nothing matched. Who are these people? David's expression darkened. That's what led me down a rabbit hole. I started with the payments and worked backward. 3 of them are women. Former Lewis Technologies employees, all terminated within the past 4 years. Catherine's stomach dropped. How many? Can I verify? 3. But I suspect there are more. He slid photographs across the table. Young women, all blonde, all beautiful, all bearing the polished sheen of ambition. Emma Rodriguez, Senior Marketing Manager, left suddenly in 2021. Sarah Chen, VP of Business Development, quit without notice in 2022. Jessica Morrison, Executive Assistant, terminated for performance issues in 2023. He paid them off. Substantial settlements. NDAs, most likely. I found the payment structures buried in legal expense accounts. Your husband has been very careful, Catherine. But not careful enough. Catherine stared at the photographs, seeing An Hernandez's face superimposed over each one. Frank had a type. Young, ambitious, dazzled by his wealth and power. Women who worked for him, who depended on him, who he could control. There's something else, David said quietly. I found communications between Frank and his attorney discussing reputation management and a potential exposure. They weren't just talking about divorce strategy. They were discussing what happens if any of these women talk. Catherine felt rage build in her chest, cold and calculating. Frank hadn't just betrayed her. He'd built an entire empire on the assumption that his money and power made him untouchable. That he could seduce employees, cheat on his wife, manipulate finances, and face 0 consequences. Doesn't know about the others. I doubt it. Women like her think they're special. That they're different from whoever came before. Catherine thought about the blonde woman in Monica's photos, looking at Frank with such certainty, such triumph. She had no idea she was just the latest in a pattern, another disposable conquest in Frank's collection. What about his business partners? Catherine asked. The board? David pulled out another document. Lewis Technologies' upcoming AI infrastructure announcement? The one Frank's been promoting? I dug into the technology claims. They're optimistic, possibly fraudulent. The capabilities he's promising to investors don't exist yet. Maybe it won't exist for years. But he's already secured $500 million in commitments based on those promises. Securities fraud. Potentially. If the technology doesn't materialize and investors lose money, the SEC would be very interested. Catherine stood and walked to the window overlooking Madison Avenue, watching people move through their lives below, unaware that in this conference room, a man's entire empire was being dissected like a cadaver. For 12 years, she'd believed in Frank. In his vision, his integrity, his fundamental decency. She'd sacrificed her career because she thought they were building something meaningful together. But Frank had been building a house of cards, held together by manipulation, secrecy, and the arrogance of a man who believed he was too powerful to fail. He'd seduced employees and paid them to disappear. He'd hidden money from his wife while planning to paint her as a gold digger. He'd lied to investors about technology that didn't exist. He'd structured finances to avoid the taxes that funded the country he'd gotten rich in. And through it all, he'd smiled at her over morning coffee and told her he couldn't have done it without her. Catherine turned back to David. I need everything. Every transaction, every payment, every lie. I need documentation that would hold up in court, in front of the SEC, in front of the IRS. Can you do that? It'll take time. And it won't be cheap. I have my own money. The trust fund from her grandmother, carefully preserved and never touched. Frank didn't even know about it. She'd kept it separate, some instinct telling her to maintain one thing that was entirely hers. Whatever it costs. David nodded slowly. Catherine, if you expose all of this, you won't just be ending your marriage. You'll be destroying Frank's company, his reputation, possibly sending him to prison. Are you sure? Catherine looked at the photographs of the young women Frank had used and discarded. She thought about the emails where he'd planned to weaponize her race and background against her. She remembered Eleanor's words, some women might take a life like this for granted. Frank had built his empire on the assumption that people, especially women, were disposable. The consequences were for other people. That his money and power made him invincible. He's not untouchable, Catherine said quietly. He just thinks he is. And that's going to be his downfall. She gathered the documents with steady hands, already planning her next moves. Frank had spent 6 months preparing to destroy her. She would spend the next 3 weeks ending him completely. Building the arsenal. The conference room at Morrison and Blake was exactly as Catherine remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the scent of expensive leather and ambition. Her former senior partner, Richard Morrison, sat across from her with reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing the files she'd brought. Jesus Christ, Catherine, he muttered, flipping through David Park's forensic analysis. Your husband is either the boldest son of a bitch in Manhattan or the stupidest. Both, Catherine said. He thinks he's untouchable. Richard looked up, his expression shifting into something predatory. He'd built his reputation destroying men like Frank Lewis. You want to take him for everything? No. Catherine's voice was steel. I want to take him for more than everything. I want him to understand what it means to underestimate someone. Then you'll need more than financial evidence. Richard pulled out a legal pad. You need a narrative that destroys him in every arena, legal, financial, and public. The court of law and the court of public opinion. That's when Catherine told him about the private investigator. Marcus Chen had a reputation for finding things people desperately wanted to stay hidden. He'd worked celebrity divorces, corporate espionage cases, political scandals. When Catherine met him in a nondescript office in Midtown, he slid a tablet across the desk with the casual confidence of a man holding for aces. "Your husband is remarkably predictable," Marcus said. "And Hernandez isn't his first affair. She's not even his third." The screen showed a timeline going back 7 years. Names, dates, photographs. Emma Rodriguez, the marketing manager David had identified. Sarah Chen, the VP. Jessica Morrison, the executive assistant. But there were 2 more, women who'd worked for Lewis Technologies briefly, who'd left abruptly, who'd signed NDAs that Marcus had somehow obtained copies of. 5 women in 7 years, Catherine said, her voice hollow. All employees. All young, ambitious, and easily dazzled by his wealth. He has a type. And a method. Marcus swiped to another screen. He pursues them during business trips. Tell them they're special, that his marriage is loveless, that he's planning to leave you. Make promises about their future together. Then when they get too demanding or someone might notice, he pays them off and moves on. Catherine studied each woman's face, seeing the same expression she'd seen in Monica's photos of hope, desire, the belief that they'd won something valuable. The NDAs are solid, Marcus continued. But NDAs don't cover illegal activity. If you could prove he used company resources for the affairs, or that there was a pattern of sexual harassment. That's not enough, Catherine interrupted. I need leverage. Something that makes them want to talk. Marcus smiled slowly. Already on it. I've reached out to 3 of the 5. Quietly. Anonymously. Asked if they'd be interested in participating in a class action lawsuit against Lewis Technologies for creating a hostile work environment. 2 were immediately interested. The 3rd wants to talk first. Catherine felt pieces clicking into place in her mind, the case building itself the way they used to in her litigation days. What about an Hernandez? Now that's interesting. Marcus pulled up a new file. Ms. Hernandez is 28, MBA from NYU, joined Lewis Technologies 8 months ago as Director of Strategic Partnerships. Classic trajectory for Frank's type. But Anne is different. She's documenting everything. He played an audio file. Frank's voice, unmistakable. Catherine and I are just waiting for the right time. After the gala, after the holidays. I promise you, baby, by spring you'll be the only Mrs. Lewis that matters. Catherine listened to her husband make promises to another woman using the same terms of endearment he used with her. Her hand clenched in her lap. She's been recording him for 2 months, Marcus explained. Video, audio, text messages she screenshot. And isn't some naive girl. She wants insurance. Proof that Frank will follow through on his promises. Or evidence to use against him if he doesn't, Catherine said. Exactly. She's smart. Ambitious. She thinks she's playing Frank. Catherine leaned back, her mind racing through possibilities. And Hernandez had leverage. She had recordings that could destroy Frank's carefully constructed narrative about their marriage growing apart naturally. She had proof of his lies, his manipulation, his promises. I want to meet with her, Catherine said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The wife wants to meet the mistress. The lawyer wants to meet a potential witness. Catherine pulled out her phone. Can you arrange it? Somewhere discreet. Tell her I have information she needs to hear about Frank Lewis. Tell her it's in her best interest. 3 days later, Catherine sat in a private room at a boutique hotel in Soho, waiting. When Anne Hernandez walked through the door, Catherine studied the woman who'd been sleeping with her husband. In person, Anne was prettier than the photos, polished but not overdone, intelligent eyes, the kind of confidence that came from doors opening easily. Anne froze when she saw Catherine. "You're his wife." "I am." "Sit down, please. We have things to discuss." "I don't think." "Frank isn't leaving me," Catherine said calmly. "He's been planning a divorce, but not for you. He's planning to paint me as an unstable gold digger, minimize my settlement, and move on with his empire intact. You're not his endgame, Anne. You're his entertainment." Anne's face went white. She sat down slowly. "You're lying." Catherine pulled out her tablet and showed Anne the emails from Frank's lawyer. The timeline of hidden assets. The financial structures designed to protect his wealth from any divorce settlement. Then she showed Anne the other photographs: Emma, Sarah, Jessica, the two others. All blonde. All young. All discarded. "You're number 5, Catherine said quietly. "Maybe number 6. I'm still investigating. Frank has a pattern. He seduces employees, promises them everything, then pays them off when they become inconvenient. You have about 2 more months before you become inconvenienced." And stared at the screen, her hands trembling. "He said he loved me. He said we'd be together. He said the same thing to all of them." Catherine leaned forward. "I know you've been recording your conversations with Frank. Smart move. But those recordings won't help you when he discards you. They'll just make him pay you off faster." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm going to destroy him," Catherine said simply. "Completely and utterly. And you can help me do it, or you can become another anonymous NDA statistic. Your choice." Anne looked up, something shifting in her expression, humiliation transforming into rage. "What do you want?" "Everything you have. Every recording, every text message, every promise he made. In exchange, I'll make sure you're protected. No NDA, no payoff that requires your silence. You'll testify in the divorce proceedings about his affair, his lies, his pattern of behavior. And when I'm done dismantling his empire, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you helped. He'll ruin me. My career. Frank won't have the power to ruin anyone when I'm finished." Catherine pulled out a document. "This is an affidavit. Your testimony about the affair, the promises, the manipulation. Sign it, give me your evidence, and I'll make sure Frank Lewis never has power over another woman again." And stared at the paper for a long moment. Catherine could see the war in her expression, wounded pride battling against fear, rage against self-preservation. Finally, Anne picked up the pen. "I want him to suffer," she said quietly. "The way he made me feel like I was special. Like I mattered. Then seeing these photos, knowing I was just a next in line. He will suffer," Catherine promised. "More than he thinks possible." As Anne signed the affidavit, Catherine felt another piece slot into place. She had the financial evidence. The pattern of affairs. The testimony of scorned women. The insider trading implications. The fraudulent technology claims. But there was one more move to make, the one that would ensure Frank's destruction was complete and public. Catherine pulled out her burner phone and composed an email to the Sex Enforcement Division. Attached were preliminary findings about Lewis Technologies' AI infrastructure claims. Nothing definitive yet. Just enough to start an investigation. Just enough to make the SEC look closer. She hit send and looked at Anne, who was wiping tears from her face. "Welcome to the team," Catherine said. "Now let's burn his empire to the ground." The Alliance. The boutique hotel in Soho was the kind of place people went to not be seen. Discreet entrance, private rooms, staff trained to forget faces. Catherine sat in a corner suite, hands folded on the table in front of her, waiting. When the door opened and Hernandez walked in, Catherine forced herself to remain still. In person, Frank's mistress was more beautiful than the photographs suggested, blonde hair perfectly styled, designer dress that probably cost $3,000, the kind of polished confidence that came from always being the prettiest woman in the room. And froze when she saw Catherine. The color drained from her face. "You're his wife." "I am." Catherine gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down, Anne. We have things to discuss." "I don't think I should be here." Anne's voice shook slightly, but she didn't leave. Curiosity, Catherine recognized. Or perhaps vanity. And wanted to see the woman she'd been competing with. "Frank isn't leaving me for you," Catherine said calmly, watching Anne's reaction. "He's been planning a divorce, yes. But not to marry you. To emerge single, wealthy, and sympathetic. You're not his endgame. You're just his alibi." Anne's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about. Frank loves me. He told me. That his marriage is loveless? That I'm cold and controlling? That you're the only one who truly understands him?" Catherine pulled out her tablet. "Let me guess. He promised you'd be together after the holidays. After the gala. After things settled down at work." And said nothing, but her silence was confirmation enough. Catherine turned the tablet around, showing the first photograph. Emma Rodriguez, blonde and smiling, in Frank's arms at what looked like a business conference. "This is Emma. Frank dated her for 6 months in 2021. Told her he was leaving me. Paid her $200,000 when she threatened to tell the board." She swiped to the next photo. Sarah Chen. 8 months in 2022. Same promises. Same outcome. $300,000 settlement. Another swipe. Jessica Morrison. His executive assistant. For months. She got fired instead of paid off, made the mistake of falling in love with him. Anne's face had gone white. She stared at the photographs like they were evidence of her own execution. "You're lying." But her voice held no conviction. Catherine showed her 2 more women. 5 in total, all blonde, all young, all discarded. "You're number 5, Anne." "Maybe 6, I'm still investigating." Frank has a type and a method. He pursues ambitious women who work for him. Tell them they're special. Make promises about the future. Then when they become inconvenient or someone might notice, he moves on. "No." Anne's hands were shaking. He said, "We have plans. After the divorce, we're going to." "There are no plans that include you." Catherine pulled up the email correspondence with Frank's lawyer. "These are from August. Frank discusses divorce strategy with his attorney. Notice anything missing? Your name. Any mention of remarrying? Any plans beyond protecting his assets and minimizing my settlement?" And read the emails, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally rage. Catherine watched the transformation, watched the moment a woman realized she'd been nothing more than a convenient distraction. "He used me," Anne whispered. "He uses everyone." Catherine leaned forward. "I know you've been recording your conversations with him. That you've kept text messages, probably screenshots of promises he's made. You're smart, Anne. You wanted insurance in case Frank didn't follow through. and looked up sharply. How did you? Because I would have done the same thing. Catherine slid a document across the table. This is an affidavit. Your testimony about the affair, the promises Frank made, the timeline of your relationship. Sign it, give me access to your recordings, and I'll make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From Frank. When I'm done with him, he'll try to destroy anyone who helped me. But if you're my witness, if you cooperate fully, you'll have legal immunity. And when Frank's empire crumbles, and it will crumble, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you helped. And laugh bitterly. Why would you help me? I've been sleeping with your husband. Because you're not my enemy. Frank is. Catherine's voice was cold, clinical. He lied to both of us. Manipulated both of us. Used both of us for his own purposes. The difference is, I'm going to make him pay for it. The question is whether you want revenge or whether you want to be another woman who let Frank Lewis get away with everything. And stared at the affidavit, her jaw working. Catherine could see the war happening behind her eyes, wounded pride versus fear, rage versus self-preservation. What's in it for you? And asked finally. Why do you need me? You're his wife. You probably have plenty of evidence already. I do. But I want him destroyed, not just divorced. I want every investor, every board member, every person who respects Frank Lewis to know exactly what kind of man he is. A serial cheater who preys on his employees. A manipulator who makes promises he never intends to keep. Your testimony makes it a pattern. Pattern means character. Character determines everything in divorce court. And picked up the document, reading carefully. Catherine recognized the behavior, and was a lawyer's daughter, maybe, or someone who'd learned to read contracts carefully. Smart woman. Just not smart enough to see through Frank. He told me you were bitter, and said quietly, still reading, that you resented his success. That you trapped him into marriage when he was young and ambitious, and now you were holding him back. Catherine felt something twist in her chest, but her face remained impassive. Is that what he said? He said you came from nothing. Scholarship student. That you married him for his money and his family's connections. And looked up. He said you were unstable. That you'd make the divorce ugly because you couldn't stand to lose control. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. It made it easier to, and stopped, closing her eyes. God, I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're young and ambitious, and Frank is very good at being whatever someone needs him to be. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed another document. These are emails Frank sent to his lawyer discussing divorce strategy. Notice the part where he discusses using my race and background to create a narrative about social climbing? Where does he suggest painting me as emotionally volatile and financially dependent? And read the emails, her expression hardening with each word. He's a monster. He's a narcissist who believes his money makes him untouchable. And for 12 years, I enabled that belief by being the perfect wife, managing his image, supporting his empire. Catherine took the phone back. I'm done enabling him. Question is, are you done being his victim? And was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her own phone, scrolling through something. She turned it around to show Catherine a video. Frank's face filled the screen, intimate and close, obviously in bed. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. Catherine and I are done, we have been for years. After the gala, after the board meeting in January, I'm filing for divorce. By spring, you'll be the only woman in my life. I promise. The timestamp was 3 days ago. I have 47 recordings like this, and said, her voice hard. Text messages where he calls you cold and controlling. Emails about trips we were planning together. He even showed me houses we could buy. Told me to start thinking about wedding venues. Catherine felt rage build in her chest, not at Anne, but at Frank. At his casual cruelty, his systematic manipulation. He destroyed their marriage while making his mistress plan a wedding that would never happen. Then we have everything we need, Catherine said quietly. And stared at the affidavit one more time, then picked up the pen. Her hand hesitated over the signature line. Will this really destroy him? Or will he just pay some fine, lose some money, and move on? I have evidence of financial manipulation, possible insider trading, and securities fraud. I have testimony from multiple women about his pattern of behavior. I have contacts at the SEC who are very interested in Lewis Technologies' claims about AI infrastructure that doesn't exist. Catherine leaned forward. When I'm done, Frank won't just lose money. He'll lose his company, his reputation, possibly his freedom. Everyone will know exactly who he is. And signed the affidavit with a sharp, violent motion. Then she looked up at Catherine with eyes that burned. Good. Because he told me I was special. That I was different from you, different from everyone else. He made me believe, her voice cracked. I want him to suffer the way I'm suffering right now. He will, Catherine promised. More than he thinks possible. They spent the next 3 hours going through Anne's evidence. Every recording, every text message, every screenshot of promises Frank had made. Catherine catalogued it all with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building an airtight case. As they worked, something strange happened. The tension between them eased. They weren't friends, could never be friends, but they were something else. Allies. Two women united by the same man's betrayal, working together to ensure he faced consequences for the first time in his privileged life. Can I ask you something? Anne said as they finished. Why did you give up your career for him? You were a partner at a major firm. Why would you sacrifice that? Catherine was quiet for a moment. Because I loved him. Because I believed in what we were building together. Because he told me he needed me, and I thought being needed was the same as being valued. And now? Now I know the difference. Catherine closed her laptop. Frank needed me to manage his life so he could focus on his empire. But he never valued me as an equal partner. I was just another resource to exploit. Anne nodded slowly. He made me feel like I was the only person who truly saw him. Like everyone else just wanted his money or his status, but I understood the real Frank Lewis. There is no real Frank Lewis, Catherine said. There's just a man who's very good at reflecting back whatever people want to see. And we both fell for it. As they prepared to leave, and hesitated at the door. What happens to me after? After the trial, after everything comes out? You rebuild. Find a new job, maybe in a different industry. Use this as a lesson about men who seem too perfect. Catherine met her eyes. You're 28. You're smart, ambitious, and now you know what real manipulation looks like. Frank took something from you, but he didn't take everything. Don't let him. Anne nodded, something like gratitude crossing her face. Then she left, and Catherine stood alone in the hotel suite, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayals. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to Marcus Chen, package delivered. Proceed to phase 2. Then she sent another message to David Park, finalize the SEC report. Include everything. It's time. Catherine looked at herself in the mirror, perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect control. But behind her eyes was something Frank would never expect from his devoted wife. Cold, calculated fury. And the absolute certainty that she was about to end him. The gala detonation. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across 400 of the most influential people in tech. Catherine stood in the entrance wearing a crimson Valentino gown that had cost $18,000, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that had taken 4 hours to perfect. She looked like a power incarnate. Frank spotted her from across the room and his face went white. He told her that morning he thought it best if she stayed home. The gala would be stressful, all business talk, nothing she'd enjoy. She'd agreed sweetly, kissed his cheek, and watched him leave. Now she watched him weave through the crowd toward her, his smile fixed in place even as panic flickered behind his eyes. "Kat, what are you doing here? I thought we agreed." "You agreed," Catherine said softly. "I changed my mind. It's your moment of triumph, darling. I wanted to be here." Frank's hand gripped her elbow, steering her toward a quiet corner. "This isn't a good time. I have investors to schmooze, board members too. I know exactly what you have to do." Catherine pulled free, her smile never wavering. "Go ahead. Give your speech. I'll wait." She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, whether to force her to leave, whether that would cause more of a scene than letting her stay. Finally, he nodded curtly and walked toward the stage where the board chairman was already introducing him. Catherine moved through the room with practiced grace, nodding to familiar faces, accepting champagne she didn't drink. She positioned herself at a center table where she'd have a clear view of Frank and, more importantly, where everyone would have a clear view of her. Frank took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He looked magnificent, bespoke tuxedo, commanding presence, the very picture of a tech visionary. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just Lewis Technology's success, but our commitment to innovation, integrity, and building a better future." Catherine stood, the movement drawing eyes. She walked toward the stage with measured steps, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. In her hands was a manila envelope. Frank saw her approaching and stumbled over his words. "And with the support of my incredible team." "Frank." Catherine's voice carried across the room, amplified by the sudden, shocked silence. She climbed the stage stairs, envelope extended. "You forgot something important." "Kat, what are you?" "Divorce papers." She said it clearly, loudly, letting the words echo. "I'm serving you. Right now. In front of everyone who matters to you." The ballroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Frank's face went from white to red. He grabbed her arm, his voice a harsh whisper. "Have you lost your mind? We'll discuss this at home." "No." Catherine pulled free and turned to face the crowd. 400 faces stared back, phones already emerging, recording everything. "We'll discuss it here. Because this divorce isn't just about a failed marriage. It's about truth and accountability." She nodded to Marcus Chen, positioned at the back of the room. He moved swiftly through the crowd, placing small boxes on tables throughout the ballroom, specifically at the tables where board members sat today. Inside those boxes, Catherine announced, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand, "You'll find thumb drives. Evidence of Frank's extramarital affairs with multiple Lewis Technologies employees. Evidence of his systematic planning to divorce me while painting me as an unstable gold digger. And most importantly, evidence of financial improprieties, hidden assets, possible insider trading, and fraudulent claims about technology that doesn't exist." "She's lying," Frank shouted, grabbing the microphone. My wife is having some kind of breakdown. I'm a lawyer, Frank. I don't make claims I can't prove. Catherine looked directly at the board chairman. Check the drives. Everything is documented. Emails, financial records, testimony from the women he exploited. A board member at the closest table had already opened his box, his face growing darker as he scrolled through his phone. Another was making urgent calls. The room's energy shifted from shocked entertainment to something more dangerous, the collective realization that scandal was unfolding in real time. Then Ana Hernandez stood up. She looked beautiful in her silver gown, every inch the polished professional. But her voice shook with barely controlled rage. Everything Catherine said is true. Frank Lewis promised me marriage, promised me a future, while simultaneously planning to divorce his wife and emerge single. He recorded private conversations with me, manipulated me, used me, just like he's used at least for other women before me. The room exploded. Phones everywhere now, recording, tweeting, calling. Board members huddled together, faces grim. Investors were already heading for exits, undoubtedly calling their lawyers. Frank stood frozen on stage, the microphone dead in his hand, watching his empire crumble in real time. Catherine met his eyes one final time. You thought you were untouchable. You were wrong. Then she walked off the stage, head high, while behind her, Frank Lewis's perfect world shattered like glass. The Reckoning. The SEC investigation was announced 72 hours after the gala. Catherine watched the press conference from her lawyer's office, Richard Morrison beside her, both of them silent as federal regulators detailed preliminary findings about Lewis Technologies' financial irregularities and misleading statements to investors. Frank's phone had been ringing constantly since the gala. She knew because she still had access to his location data, could see him moving frantically between his lawyer's office, the company headquarters, and emergency board meetings. The board had given him 48 hours to resign voluntarily or face termination for cause. He was trying to fight it, calling in favors, threatening lawsuits. But the evidence was everywhere now, spreading through the tech industry like wildfire. And had gone to the Times. The article ran on page 1, Tech Billionaire's Pattern of Exploitation, 5 Women Tell Their Stories. And positioned herself carefully, not as a willing participant, but as another victim of Frank's manipulation. The other women Catherine had contacted through Marcus joined her. Emma Rodriguez. Sarah Chen. Even Jessica Morrison, who'd been too afraid initially, found courage in numbers. He made us feel special, and told the reporter. Then he made us feel disposable. I'm speaking out so no other woman falls for his lies. Catherine's phone hadn't stopped ringing either, but her calls were different. Women from their social circle, wives of Frank's business associates, women who'd attended countless dinners and galas, reaching out privately with support. I always knew something was off about him, Eleanor Bradford told her over lunch, the same woman Eleanor Lewis had demanded Catherine not seat her near. The way he'd look at young women. The way he spoke about you when you weren't around, like you were his assistant rather than his wife. More women came forward with stories. Frank at conferences, making inappropriate comments. Frank at charity events, his hand lingering too long on lower backs. Nothing actionable individually, but together they painted a portrait of a man who viewed women as acquisitions. Meanwhile, Frank tried to control the narrative. He gave an interview to Forbes, his voice carefully modulated into wounded dignity. My wife is understandably hurt by the end of our marriage, but her vindictiveness has destroyed a company that employs 2,000 people. This isn't about accountability, it's about revenge. But the reporter pressed him on the financial irregularities. The offshore accounts. The pattern of affairs with employees. Frank stumbled through answers that convinced no one. Catherine watched the interview from her new apartment, a penthouse she'd purchased with her grandmother's trust fund, the one Frank had never known existed. Richard called immediately afterward. He's desperate. His lawyer contacted me this morning with a settlement offer. $20 million, the Hamptons house, and he keeps Lewis Technologies. Catherine laughed, the sound cold and humorless. Counteroffer, $150 million, all 3 properties, 40% of his stock options, and a public apology acknowledging his affairs and financial misconduct. Plus he steps down from the board entirely. Cout, he'll never agree to that. Then we go to trial, where I'll call Anne, Emma, Sarah, Jessica, and the 2 others Marcus found. Where David will testify about the hidden accounts and possible fraud. Where the SEC investigation will be Exhibit A. Catherine's voice was steel. Frank's choice is whether he wants to be quietly wealthy or publicly destroyed. Richard was silent for a moment. You've changed. The Catherine I knew 12 years ago would have negotiated for fairness. Catherine from 12 years ago didn't know she was married to a monster. She looked out at the Manhattan skyline, at the city that had witnessed her transformation from devoted wife to avenging attorney. Now I'm negotiating for justice. Frank's lawyer called back 6 hours later. They'd accept everything except the public apology, Frank's pride couldn't tolerate that final humiliation. Catherine considered it. She had the money, the properties, the vindication. Frank would be stepping down from the company he'd built, his reputation in tatters, facing ongoing federal investigation. The public apology would be satisfying, but perhaps unnecessary. Tell him I'll accept on one condition, Catherine said. He makes a $10 million donation to a scholarship fund for women in STEM. In my name. The donation was announced 2 days later. Catherine Lewis Scholarship Fund for Women in Technology. The press release included a single quote from Frank, supporting women's advancement in tech is essential for our industry's future. Catherine read it and smiled. Frank thought he was being magnanimous, that he was controlling the narrative one final time. He didn't realize that every scholarship recipient would know the fund existed because Frank Lewis had tried to destroy his wife and failed. That his support for women was actually a monument to his defeat. The divorce was finalized 30 days later. Catherine walked out of the courthouse with $150 million, 3 properties, and her dignity intact. Frank walked out facing SEC charges, a destroyed reputation, and the knowledge that he'd underestimated the wrong woman. That night, Catherine had dinner with Monica, Anne, and the 3 other women who'd testified. An unlikely alliance, born from shared trauma and collective rage. To survive Frank Lewis, Monica raised her glass. To destroy him, Anne corrected, her smile sharp. Catherine touched her glass to theirs and said nothing. Because Frank wasn't destroyed, not yet. He still had money, still had influence, still had his freedom. But he'd lost the one thing he valued most, the belief that he was untouchable. And Catherine had proven something more important, that the women he dismissed, manipulated, and discarded were far more powerful together than he'd ever been alone. The woman she was meant to be. Catherine stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office in the Flatiron district, watching the city wake below her. 6:30 in the morning, but she wasn't here to make someone else's coffee anymore. She was here because Elevation Capital's first quarterly report was due, and she wanted to review every detail personally. The office was nothing like Frank's sterile tech aesthetic, all glass and cold metal. Catherine had chosen warm woods, art from black women artists, furniture that invited conversation rather than intimidation. On the wall behind her desk hung a simple plaque, Elevation Capital, investing in voices that haven't been heard. Her phone buzzed. A text from Monica, Forbes is out. You look like a goddamn queen. Catherine pulled up the article on her tablet. The headline read, Catherine Lewis, From Shadow to Spotlight, How One Woman Built a $200 million Fund in 6 months. The photograph showed her in her office, commanding and confident, no mention of Frank until paragraph 7. And even then, it was clinical. Lewis, who divorced tech entrepreneur Frank Lewis last year amid scandal, has leveraged her legal expertise and industry connections to become one of the most sought-after investors in emerging markets. Frank was mentioned once. Catherine was mentioned 43 times. She smiled and set the tablet down, turning back to the pitch deck on her laptop. Elevation Capital had funded 18 companies in 6 months, all led by women or minority entrepreneurs who'd been passed over by traditional VC firms. The fund was already showing returns that made her former Wall Street colleagues take notice. Last week, she'd had coffee with 3 different venture capitalists who wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. Men who'd ignored her at galas when she was Frank's wife now sought her expertise, her capital, her endorsement. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her assistant knocked softly. Ms. Lewis, your 9 o'clock is here. Jasmine Williams from Catalyst AI. Catherine had been looking forward to this meeting all week. Jasmine was 26, brilliant, and building artificial intelligence tools for education accessibility. She'd been rejected by 7 VC firms, all run by men who couldn't see past her age and her Howard University credentials to recognize genius when it sat across from them. Jasmine entered nervously, clutching her laptop like a shield. She was young, black, wearing a blazer that had probably cost half her rent. Catherine recognized that look, the determination mixed with exhaustion, the knowledge that you had to be twice as good to get half the respect. Ms. Lewis, thank you so much for seeing me. I know you're incredibly busy. Sit, please. Catherine gestured to the comfortable chairs by the window, deliberately avoiding the formal conference table. And call me Catherine. Tell me about Catalyst. As Jasmine launched into her pitch, Catherine saw herself from 15 years ago, brilliant, hungry, convinced that excellence would be enough. Watching this young woman explain her vision with such passion, such certainty, Catherine felt something shift in her chest. Not nostalgia. Purpose. The technology addresses learning disabilities that traditional education systems ignore, Jasmine was saying, her hands moving expressively. Dyslexia, ADHD, processing disorders, we can customize content delivery in real time based on how each student's brain actually works. Early testing shows 73% improvement in comprehension and retention. What's your biggest obstacle right now? Jasmine hesitated. Funding. And credibility. I've been told my team is too young, that I don't have enough business experience, that the market isn't ready for. She stopped, seeming to catch herself. I'm sorry. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. You're not complaining. You're describing systemic barriers. Catherine leaned forward. Let me guess. The VCs who rejected you asked if you had our adult supervision on your board. Questioned whether you understood scalability. Suggest you bring on a more experienced CEO and stay on as Chief Technical Officer. Jasmine's eyes widened. How did you know? Because they said the same things to every woman in this room before you. And they said it to me for 12 years, in more subtle ways. Catherine pulled up Jasmine's financials on her tablet. Your projections are conservative, your technology is sound, and your team is passionate. You don't need adult supervision. You need capital and someone who believes in your vision. So you'll invest. I'll do better than that. Elevation will lead your Series A round, $5 million initially, with options for 10 more based on milestones. But I'm also going to connect you with 3 other founders I've funded who've navigated similar challenges. And I'm going to introduce you to my board, so when other investors see Elevation Capital backing you, they'll take you seriously. Jasmine's hands were shaking. I don't understand. Why would you do all this? You've only known me for 20 minutes. Catherine thought about Frank's gala, about standing on that stage and reclaiming her power. About Anne and Monica and all the women who'd stood with her. About the 12 years she'd spent making herself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of what she should be. Because someone should have done it for me, Catherine said quietly. Because I spent a decade supporting a man who took credit for my contributions. Because I know what it's like to be brilliant and invisible at the same time. She met Jasmine's eyes. And because the world needs what you're building. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. After Jasmine left, floating, overwhelmed, already texting her co-founders, Catherine stood at the window again. Her reflection stared back at the woman who'd been destroyed and rebuilt herself into something stronger. Her phone buzzed. A news alert: Frank Lewis settles SEC charges, agrees to 5-year ban from serving as public company officer. Catherine read the headline and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, not even curiosity. Frank was someone else's problem now, or more accurately, he was his own problem. His empire diminished, his reputation shattered, his untouchability revealed as the illusion it always was. She deleted the notification and returned to her work. That evening, Catherine had dinner with a man she'd been seeing casually, a professor at Columbia, kind and intelligent, who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts rather than her connections. When he asked about her day, she told him about Jasmine, about Catalyst AI, about the satisfaction of funding something that mattered. You're different than when we first met, he observed. More present. I spent 12 years performing, Catherine said. Being who someone else needed me to be. Now I'm just being myself. Turns out that's enough. Later, alone in her penthouse, the one she'd bought with her own money, decorated to her own taste, Catherine poured a glass of wine and stood at her own windows, looking at her own city. She thought about the woman who'd woken at 4:30 every morning to make coffee for a man who was planning her destruction. Who'd sacrificed her career, her identity, her power because she believed partnership meant surrender. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that the opposite of being controlled wasn't being alone, it was being autonomous. That supporting others didn't require diminishing yourself. That power shared with the right people multiplied instead of divided. Catherine raised her glass to her reflection, to the empire she was building, to every woman who'd ever been told she was too much or not enough. To elevation, she said softly. And somewhere in the city below, Frank Lewis was probably having the same realization Catherine had 6 months ago, that the person you underestimate the most is often the one who destroys you completely. The difference was, Catherine had used that lesson to build something beautiful. Frank would spend the rest of his life living in its shadow. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.